Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to contain my reaction to Chapter 18, Part 1 of the main campaign, and I'll also be discussing the latest version update coming to Dragalia Lost, version 2.5. We're going to start off today with the version update, that way players who haven't completed the campaign yet can avoid story spoilers, so we'll save Chapter 18 Part 1 for the end of the video. Let's go ahead and click in here to the notice we got yesterday on the version update. Pretty exciting stuff announced. It's a relatively small post, but lots of goodies in here, some insights as to the next endgame content, as well as some balance changes for certain dragons. So we'll slowly delve through all of this, and then we'll round things out with a Chapter 18 reaction. Alright, so to start off, we get our usual preamble. We're getting a free 10-fold voucher once this actually rolls out. It's coming sometime next week, the 24th or the 25th. And if you're in different versions of the game, you can't play co-op with one another. Okay, so for the first update detail, new feature, shapeshifting and autoplay. We knew that this was coming, but it's still nice to see it acknowledged here. You can see how the interface works. And I think that this is actually really exciting for players who enjoy auto and solo. That is more of the RPG aspect of Dragalia, I feel, is experimenting with builds, team setups, and trying to toggle your composition so that you get something that works on its own. In co-op play, there's often one or two builds that are really optimal, and you don't have a lot of decisions to make as to the characters you're using. But when it comes to solo and auto, I actually feel like you can really try a lot of different things out and see what works for you. Even if it's a semi-auto, it's still pretty fun to mess around with. At least that's my take on it. That's one of the reasons I like solo play a lot. But I think this is a cool feature. I'm not sure if it's going to break open all content in the way that I might imagine it would, or might have imagined it would have a little while back when I started thinking about this a little more. I do think there are still some big impediments in the content that's currently hard to auto, but the fact that this is so new, I could see it, having totally different setups compared to what we're used to, innovative setups working with dragon transformation, and that enabling autos in a way that I couldn't even foresee. So I don't necessarily think that Tartarus and Volk, which are the two harder Agitos to full auto right now, I don't necessarily think on expert difficulty this is going to suddenly break them open, but I think that it might enable some new comps to be discovered and new ideas to be tested that we're not even thinking about that actually could have really high success rates. So that's kind of my take on this. Also, if you're more of a semi-auto person or you can't quite fully auto battle, this is a really big quality of life feature, because a lot of semi-autos, the one thing that you had to do was dragon, and that would push you over the top. This will do that for you, and with dragons like Phoenix, Freya that provide healing regen, that could be potentially really good. Gauna and Krenna give all your team extra skills, and therefore iframes could potentially be really good at the right time. So this is interesting. It also brings into question like the timing of the shapeshift. You might be looking at your auto teams and thinking, how quickly do they fill up the dragon gauge? At what point will they be ready for shapeshifting? And do I need to vary my comp to stagger the timing so that it happens at a more appropriate time in the battle? Do I need to take off or put on Dragon Haste to make it happen at the right moment when I really want those heals or really want that skill recharge zone or what have you? Also for dragons like Gozu Tenno and Midgardsormr Zero, just being able to shapeshift and put that debuff on the boss is really sweet. So I don't know how much of this will actually pan out, because I think that the non-shapeshifting auto comps are already pretty competent. So you might not want to mess with a good thing. So who knows if people actually test and experiment that much with all of this stuff. I'm most excited to try it for Volk and Tartarus for sure. But for example, with Tartarus, like Gale Yuden is a character I'm really curious to experiment with. Wasn't high on him in the past, but I think the fact that he can automatically shapeshift at low HP is going to be really good with this. When you do shapeshift, you lose Fury of the Fallen, so your damage is no longer reduced, and he has increased dragon damage, so that could be a way to potentially explode through the first phase of Expert Tartarus. Another thing that also comes to mind is like helpers that have Ramiel give you a shapeshift immediately at the start of a quest now, and it actually happens since it's automatically enabled. That could be kind of a cool thing to try out. overall, I think this is really neat, even just for like putting a mem on your auto team or something like that. Like, sure, there aren't a lot of settings right now where that's your preferred lead adventurer in an auto setup, but just the fact that you can actually use characters who rely upon dragon ramping and transformation and do more explosive damage through that is kind of neat. So overall, I think this is a good quality of life feature. Who knows how broken this will be, but I think that it's at least something to think about. It gives us something new to do and test out, and I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so moving on to equipment sets. When editing a team, players can now register individual equipment sets that determine which weapon, dragon, and worm prince an adventurer will equip. Once registered, a set can be applied to a particular adventure to have them automatically equip the specified loadout. This is nice. I have a hard time seeing myself actually using this because of the setup costs. I do have over 200 adventures at this point. I just can't imagine myself going through and creating a set for each of them. The biggest problem with this, in my view, is that in building teams, right, unless you're doing co-op building and you only equip your first adventure, when you're actually building a team, what I found with the wormprint decks is that a lot of the wormprints I use overlap across the different characters, and for that reason, when I try equip the deck to my second character, it'll often take off prints from my first character. I have to go back anyway for things like Flurry Strength, 20%, for some other effects like Poison Punisher or Burning Punisher or whatever. Like Burning Punisher is an exception because I have 4 prints that are identical for that, but like the 30% Poison Punisher 5-star print, I only have 1 of those and the rest I have 4 stars. So essentially there's still a lot of like finagling I have to do to get my team right. So I just feel like the setup cost of this isn't worth it for me personally, but I don't mind this existing. I think it's a nice quality of life update for sure. And then they're reviving an old feature to copy or duplicate team setups. Also cool, this existed before via a bug. Now it's actually properly in the game. Cool. Probably a quality of life feature I'm not going to use as well, but maybe a little bit more likely to use this one than I am the equipment sets. Alright, so now we get some details about Rise of the Sinister Dominion, our next endgame content after the Agito Uprising. So we find out it's going to start on March 5th. In certain difficulties, the player's current team will be swapped out mid-battle with another one. So they must prepare 2 teams of differing elemental attunements beforehand. That right there is a huge bombshell. That's very exciting because we've been lacking something in Dragalia Lost to really use your full roster for a long time. And for players who have been with the game for a while, it is kind of sad. As you collect new adventures, it's fun, but like you often just stick to a few adventures, like maybe 20 adventures at most that you use all the time. So I love this concept. This reminds me of things in other gachas, like where you'll send out characters in your collection on expeditions, or like to go forage some things. It also reminds me of Arena Assault and Fire Emblem, where you actually have different teams, and it's important that you have 7 teams properly built. So the fact that this is 2 teams, I feel like that's manageable while still exciting. And the differing elemental attunements, I don't know if that's actually a strict requirement or a suggestion, but either way it indicates that Rise of the Sinister Dominion could be our first multi-element endgame content where maybe the boss switches elements in the middle of the battle. If it's mandatory, that also means that continuing along the lines of Legend, the devs are also sort of rooting out some of the cheese and off-element strategies that have emerged. But even if it's just optional, the fact that it's 2 different elements is cool. I mean, it gives you something new to think about that we've never had to think about in the game before, so I really, really like this. Alright, so we also find out drop rewards will include wormprints that can be equipped in new slots on weapons, and the materials required to unbind and add copies of those wormprints. Players must complete Chapter 16 to play this, and further details will be provided in a separate notification. Okay, so we find out more about the wormprints aspect here. Updated system wormprints. With the addition of the first Rise of the Sinister Dominion quest, special slots and weapons and wormprints that can only be equipped in these slots will become available. Depending on the weapon, up to 2 of these wormprints may be equipped, so that's a surprise to me because I thought the maximum number of wormprints would be 6, not 7. and the slots for them may be unlocked using materials that drop from Rise of the Sinister Dominion quest. Affinities from these new worm prints will count toward affinity bonuses in the same manner as those from existing worm prints. Okay, so it's a way to incorporate the affinity system. I like that because with only 5 slots, it is tight. Sometimes it happens where you get affinity bonuses, most often on buffers or healers, where you can get that buff time bonus or maybe the skill haste bonus. But a lot of times these days, the affinity bonus outside of dragon damage, you're very rarely, dragon damage and buff time, you're very rarely going to get many of these affinity bonuses. But having more slots could help with that problem greatly, because now you could potentially flex on some of those slots affinities, and that could be a cool option. So what else do we find out here? Let's see. So we see a picture. I guess this on the left is the icon of the worm print. Skill damage plus 20%, but remember, this has 0 nodes unlocked. It could very well not be unbound, because look at these abilities on here. Like, you can have 0 stat nodes and still be an unbound worm print, but based on the percentages they're showing for these other abilities, these other worm prints are both 0 node and not unbound. So if this is 20% and has no unbinds, then at 2 unbinds it could be 30, and then max it could be 40. It could be like an unconditional 40% skill damage worm print, which would free up the usual weapon skill damage worm print that we're used to seeing, like sword skill damage 40%. So you could potentially cap out skill damage with this worm print alone, and then that greatly increases the diversity and variety of other prints you can use, because you're no longer having to use a weapon skill damage print. That's already kind of cool to see this. And then it has an affinity boon that I want to say grants paralysis res. I can't quite remember what the snake one does, but it's one of the affliction resisting ones. Worm prints that may be equipped in these new slots are different from existing worm prints in that in addition to holy water and consecrated water, they can also be upgraded using special items that drop in place of duplicated worm prints. These worm prints may be unbound, and copies may be added with said special items, as well as materials that drop from Rise of the Sinister Dominion. However, they may not be unbound with silver keys or golden keys. So interestingly, they don't say anything about whether you can unbind them with Eld Water. They just say not with silver or golden, and you can do it with drops. Based on the picture here, it looks like unbinding, you have to use the drops, which kind of makes sense. That is sort of how Agito weapons work, right? Like, if this is a farmable in-game thing, then it makes sense for this to have its own progression system, not linked to Eld Water. Otherwise, if you've just stashed up a lot of Eld Water, why play this mode and get these special drops to unbind your worm prints? But the difference being that you could also spin these drops to level up or give stats to the prints, but unless the cost of doing that is significantly different, like it's way cheaper to do it with the mats than with consecrated and blessed water, I really just think you'd want to level them up with consecrated and blessed water, because I don't know about y'all, but like we've gotten a lot of that over the years. I think I have like 100,000 of the gold level of consecrated water. So unless the cost with that material is very high, I can't imagine wanting to spend this material, this new material, on leveling up when I could use it on unbinding instead, or even adding copies potentially, because these worm prints, if this is just unconditional 40% skill damage, that seems like a good worm print to have multiple copies of. Alright, so new mechanic, Overdrive Counter. A new mechanic, the Overdrive Counter, will appear in Rise of the Sinister Dominion quest. When and only when an enemy in the overdrive state attacks with a red action marker, players can reduce that enemy's overdrive mode gauge by an amount greater than normal if they use an attack to inflict damage. In other words, counter. We plan to include this mechanic in more quests in the future. Very, very cool. So this rewards you for timing your skill usage to iframe enemy attacks that have a red action marker. If you're not aware, when you see a red action marker or a yellow action marker, you can use a skill to avoid taking damage from the attack. With rare exceptions, if it's a red marker that has crosshairs, that means you can't avoid it, so that's kind of unusual that they kept the same color for that. But that only comes up mostly in High Dragons and a few other quests as well, when it locks onto you. But like, in general, you can iframe red attacks. You can roll through them, or you can use a skill. this actually rewards you for using a skill instead of just trying to roll through them. And of course, the other reason you want to use a skill is that grants iframes or invulnerability frames for your entire team, not just your lead character. Cool. This seems like a sweet mechanic. And we'll see just how obnoxious or difficult these bosses are in Overdrive. If their Overdrive state is anything like the Berserk state, this could get very, very interesting. And depleting the Overdrive gauge is obviously huge in Berserk. So, using these skills at the appropriate time in Berserk is already how you keep your team alive. Like maybe this is another way that they incentivize skilled play, like timing everything at the right moment and making combat more exciting in the process. All right, and finally that brings us to other changes. So first of all, the logic that determines how AI-controlled adventurers dodge certain action markers will be adjusted. Who knows exactly how that's going to work? I hope, it says action marker specifically, so this may not be the case. I really hope that this addresses some of the untelegraphed attacks that leave like pools on the battlefield, damage AoE pools, like in Hybernilda, for example. The AI just don't know how to deal with Grun X Muspelheim at all. They just run to their death into it like repeatedly and burn. It's horrible. So there are certain moves that the AI just cannot deal with right now. I hope that this is sort of addressing those, but it may also be some other things I'm not even thinking of. The Dragon Gala Reborn Poseidon's abilities Water Fury of the Seas 1 and Water Fury of the Seas 2 will be adjusted to also affect enemies with no elemental attunement. Alright, so this definitely improves Gala Reborn Poseidon. I misread this at first. When I first saw this, I thought this said with any elemental attunement. It says with no elemental attunement. So what this means is Gala Reborn Poseidon is going to be better against enemies like Morsayati. Morsayati is a raid boss, endgame boss, that has no element. But it's not necessarily going to mean that your Gala Reborn Poseidon is any better against Tartarus or Kaiyan, etc. It's still going to work well against flame enemies and also neutral element enemies. And likewise with Gala Reborn Zephyr, same deal. It's now going to work well against enemies with no element, which would mean Morsayati basically. I think this is a good change. One of my concerns with Gozu Tenno's release was Gozu Tenno seemed like a direct power creep on Gala Reborn dragons. I've never been that high on the Gala Reborn series, but Gozu Tenno for me felt like the nail in the coffin because it's a seasonal dragon that did exactly what a Gala Reborn dragon does, but also had a really good skill that permanently reduces enemy resistance to flame damage. So like enemies take more damage from flame characters afterward, right? These two dragons didn't have that aspect to their kit at all. So it made me feel like seasonals can just power creep Gala Reborn dragons. Now it gives them a little something something. The fact that Gozu Tenno's not listed here, it also could just be they forgot about him and it's a mistake. But based on what's written here, Gozu Tenno still won't get bonus damage against Morsayati because Morsayati has no element, but he's still useful in that fight because he can permanently reduce Morsayati's flame damage or flame resistance, so increase the damage of flame adventurers like Mim against him. So I think this is a good compromise. I assume that this will be how things work for our next Gala Reborn dragon, who we'll talk about shortly. And then we have adventurers wielding rapid fire mana casters will be able to move while performing their Force Strike. This is apparently really huge. Y'all know I'm not somebody who summoned for Leonidas. I didn't summon for Shell. I do have Lapis though. Haven't really gotten a chance to use her very much. So I'm not really privy to the rapid fire mana caster lifestyle that people have going, where they're just force striking and have really good SP generation. Apparently that's a very lavish way to play the game these days, and now you can just roll around, strut around, and just charge up SP. Like, this seems really good. I mean, rapid fire manacasters, I feel kind of bad for all the other manacaster playstyles at this point. That seems really good, since that's like all these characters do. They just force strike. A lot of them don't even use their skills. Granted, that's kind of a stretch, because like there aren't that many rapid fire manacasters to begin with, but like a few of them don't really use their skills very much. So okay, I guess this is just like a really just straight upgrade to rapid fire manacasters. If autoplay is enabled and both the skill Houndshot and Ace Operator are available for the adventurer from Hakim to use, he'll use Ace Operator first and Houndshot directly after. Cool. There's lots of adventurers like this who order their skills in the wrong order. You know, with Time Attack coming up, I would love it if the AI of Valentine's Addis or Natalie automatically used their second skill first and got to a low HP first before using their first skill, but I don't think that's the reality. Not sure, haven't checked in a while. But for characters such as Formal Hakim who have a specific order they want to do their skills in, if they could copy this logic and apply it to all those types of characters, that would be fantastic. The appearance of certain objects in quests will be adjusted, okay, very vague. The user interface will be adjusted in various places, also pretty vague. And then some issues were addressed, and that's pretty much it for the version update. Alright, so let's hop over to Chapter 18, Part 1. And the first thing I want to talk about is not even related to the chapter itself, but Draconic Essence Update. These are solid dragons in this Draconic Essence Update. If you are not familiar with this system, I'm going to take a moment because this is one of the things I most frequently see players question and not understand is these Draconic Essences and how they work. You can see right here this button that says Draconic Essences. In order to collect essences, you have to have unlocked the hard or very hard difficulties of the main campaign. You don't get those until you've cleared through, I want to say, at least chapter 10, and possibly later for very hard, but you get them by playing through the campaign, right? And once you get those difficulties, all of these little icons here are unbinds, free unbinds on a dragon, but there's a limit of how many of them you can collect a day. That's why I think it's important that I point this out, because this is a long-term project. It's great, it's awesome. Free unbinds on really good dragons, meaning you're not going to spend Sunlight Stones on these dragons. You're going to save those for Gala, seasonal dragons, more powerful dragons, or just hang on to them for the future. So I want to just make clear like what you do with this, how to use it. Like this is the interface. So the dragons that were added are Apollo, fantastic dragon, Strength and Burning Punisher. Really, really solid dragon. I would have totally used that in my Volk solo if I could have, of Legend Volk, if he had been available at the time in the Draconic Essences. Alright, so in addition, we have in the Wind Element, Vayu. Vayu is just an awesome skill damage dragon. It's great to see Vayu present here. Now all of these skill damage dragons, 20% strength, 90% skill damage, are available to unbind for free via essences, including Siren, Konohana Sakuya, and in the Shadow Element, Shinobi. So good to see Vayu make an appearance. And I had skipped over Nimbus. Nimbus is a great water dragon, surprisingly good, but particularly once you have access to Agito weapons. So I think that Leviathan, probably still a slightly better priority over Nimbus in the early game, and then Siren, probably the best of the three. But Nimbus has a really good dragon form, and a lot of water characters can take advantage of the high critical damage thanks to their Agito weapon skill. So I think he's also very good. Popstar Siren, excellent support dragon. She's someone I have never maxed and bound, but before Gaon and Krenna, she was a go-to for off-element healers. That's like one of the main dragons you want to run on a healer regardless of the element of content that you're in, because she provides such good team support and utility, increases damage by buffing the entire team. She's still pretty good if you don't have two Gaon and Krenna. I think you still want to use Popstar Siren in some scenarios rather than create skill recharge zones. So I think she's a great dragon. And then Andromeda, a little more specific. She specifically wants to be used on low HP adventurers, but I think that she's a great dragon. Once again, 80% strength when adventurers are at 30% HP or below is very solid for characters like Belina, Valentine's Addis, who want to stay at low HP, even Natalie. So let's click on Andromeda here. And when you click on any of these dragons, you click how to acquire. And then you see the quest that you have to go to unlock them or to get these essences. And if you click, you jump straight to that quest. So that's an easy way to navigate and find these dragons. So I want to make sure people are aware of this system and taking advantage of it. And you can see that you can only get 3 per day on very hard of these essences. And on hard, you can also get 3 per day. And when I switch to very hard here, this is something that I like to skip ticket on. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do this. Here's my team. It's just a plain Luca that I was strolling around with. And you skip. This is a good thing to save these for. Otherwise, you can play through it manually or auto battle it. And notice when I skipped on this, instead of just getting 1 Draconic Essence because drop rewards are ×2, I actually get 2. So in a given day, right now it's the Shadow element, but depending on whatever element has double drops, and in this case also half stamina costs, basically you can get 6 of these on very hard and 6 on hard. So in a given day, you can get 12 essences for 1 dragon, and it takes a total of 50 to get 1 unbind. So you actually want to make sure you're doing that during these half stamina double drop periods to slowly build up those unbinds, because then in about 4-5 days, you're going to start having unbinds and getting real returns on your dragon. So over the course of the double drop period, I think you get like 2 unbinds on these dragons. It's really good when they're on half stamina double drops. And a lot of these dragons are fantastic. Like in Shadow here, Shinobi should definitely be a priority, with Epimetheus also being good, Nidhogg good if you don't have Azazel, and Andromeda good for Belina specifically. So just want to point that out as a quick little PSA aside plug, because I think it's awesome whenever they update that. So let's get back into Chapter 18 itself. Alright, so I actually really like Chapter 18. Obviously this is just part 1, so it was short. Honestly, I was coming into this expecting not to like it in some ways, because I figured that, okay, it's another opportunity for them to shoehorn in a Void Dragon. Like, there's going to be a non sequitur, we're going to find a Void Dragon out of nowhere. I don't even know why those need to be in the campaign. It just seems like totally unnecessary. These Gala Reborn dragons would already sell because they're good dragons. Why put them in the campaign out of nowhere? It makes no sense to me, right? But then I saw Gala Reborn Jeanne d'Arc, and she was just so beautiful. And her with Luca, they looked so good that I had to set aside all of that cynicism, and I was like, okay, well, it worked. Now I want to summon for Gala Reborn Jeanne d'Arc, so I guess it worked. I was also looking forward to this chapter to find out more about Kaiyan. So in the previous chapter, one of the things I don't think I mentioned much in my discussion of that was I thought it was interesting how we learned about the slums of Graham and how Gatov had kind of a familiarity with Volk. Gatov, I think, was known as the Blaze Wolf, and Volk has this whole wolf motif, so it made me think that maybe Volk is from Graham's, and his origin story is that he grew up in this place where there's this great discrepancy between the weak and the poor and downtrodden, and the wealthy, the rich, the powerful, and that led to his worldview. And so what I was really excited about going into this chapter was, what are we going to learn about Kaiyan's worldview? How did he become the way that he is? And I don't think we quite got that, but we did get a couple of things. One, he got his power, or the extent of his power, from Nedric in some way. So Nedric granted him some additional power, and we also found out that he used a Chillin relic to power himself up further. We know that he's of the Chillin race, and he has an issue with harmony among species. Right now, my take on Kaiyan is that at some point in his life, he lacked the power to protect people, and specifically the Chillin people, because he does have this racial element to him that's kind of weird and kind of uncomfortable, obviously. But I think that maybe something happened, and we know that there's not that many Chillin in the game. There's like Jiangxia and Xuansang and not many others today, even though historically there were a lot of Chillin sealers and they had this advanced technology with the relics. Maybe there's a decline in the amount of sealers and in their civilization, and that's like his grudge. Maybe he couldn't protect his family or something. He lacked the power, and then that set him on this warpath. But I still don't think that would lead him to be as crazy as he is. So now my working theory is that the masks that Nedric gives to the Agito members, not only does it grant them incredible power, but it also grants them madness, and it makes their worldview warp and become crazed. Because with both Kaiyan and Volk, I think there's some clear flaws in the logic of their worldview, right? Like, Kaiyan, for example, when he had to acknowledge that Luca was actually strong and not weak, and he's actually weaker than Luca, isn't that an existential crisis at that moment when you realize that, hey, the one that I was trying to cull off that I thought was weaker is actually stronger than me. So what do you do at that point? Do you cull off yourself? I mean, that's just an indicator of how horrific Kaiyan's worldview actually is. But I think that we're moving in a really interesting place with the story. I'm so pumped for Gala not and for not to shine in part 2 of this chapter. Like, I think that is going to be awesome for the 2.5-year anniversary. So I'm really excited about it. I really liked the chapter more than I thought. It was kind of low-key, kind of simple. Mascula had several good moments. That was really nice. And Yuden, although he's still on his mission, trying to do his thing, figure out his identity, he didn't really steal the spotlight for me. Like, everybody got a chance to do some cool things and shine in this chapter. It was a Luca chapter. It was going to be a good chapter, but it was a really good chapter. So overall, I really enjoyed it. That is going to do it for today, everyone. Let me know what you thought about the new version update and chapter 18 in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.